In this interview, I'm going to be talking to Werner Antweiler, who is a economics professor at the University of British Columbia, about Canada's relationship with the European Union. On June 23rd, our country signed a joint agreement, and there was Prime Minister Mark Carney was in Brussels for an announcement. And there's been a lot of talk about pushing back against Donald Trump and his tariffs in the United States, and would we join the European Union, and so on and so forth. And I want to clarify that. And Werner is the perfect expert to interview. So welcome to the interview, Werner.
Hello, Markham.
Good to have you back. Okay, so there's been this sense of, oh, Canada is joining the EU, or Canada is going to have very close relations, but we already have a relationship. We already have the Canada-European Union Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CEDA. Maybe that's a good place to start. If you could give us an overview, please.
Yeah, CETA has been a long time in the making, and that goes back now basically at least 10 years when negotiations started, and have set us on a track of easing some of the existing trade barriers and also lowering some of the investment barriers. The nature of the agreement is going well beyond trade. The name comprehensive means it's also about investment. It's also about actually facilitating other types of cooperation. And that has now been in place. It's not actually fully ratified by all the European countries. So even though it is practically enforced legally, it's a little bit still in limbo. And very embarrassingly, one country hasn't really fully signed off on it. But in fact, all sides have agreed that it's good enough. We're actually implementing it. And so we are enjoying the full benefits from CETA already.
So what this does, as I understand it, is that it's a free trade agreement. It's not unlike in concept what we have with the United States. Started out with NAFTA 40 years ago. Now it's CUSMA, Canada, U.S., Mexico agreement. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
Yes, essentially it's a free trade agreement, but it always comes with a caveat that free trade isn't comprehensively free trade. It's mostly free trade. And so that applies to all the types of merchandise goods that are being traded. But there are exceptions. And those exceptions typically apply to agriculture and certain rules about how to conduct trade in those areas. For example, recognizing certain rules about origin. The European Union has very strict origins about what could be labeled as Parmesan cheese or wine from France, from certain regions. And so in terms of recognizing certain principles, the agreement actually tries to facilitate that, as well as recognizing that Canada has supply management in dairy products. And so the CETA agreement opens it up a little bit, so the door is kind of pushed open a little bit further, but facing a lot of resistance still from producers here in Canada. But that said, the key issues are also about investment. We can talk about that separately. But trade has certainly become more easy to facilitate. Some of the red tape is certainly streamlined. And that said, Europe is still far away from Canada. So we're not actually trading quite as much with Europe as we're trading with the United States.
My take on the what was announced, and there was some language in the Prime Minister's statement that was released on June 23rd. There was quite a long statement about all the things that have been talked about, and there was an annex that described them in more detail. But one of the things that that was prominent in that document is the intention of the EU and the Canada to move closer together, quote unquote, over a long period of time.
Yes, and what I understand from this is that we're seeking harmonization of certain rules. So things that will essentially make trade and commerce easier, as well as, of course, there are coordination on other policy domains. Security issues and defense issues, certainly first and foremost among those these days. But what I see here as the objective is to look at where can we harmonize rules so that producers don't have to comply with separate Canadian and EU rules. The EU has a very well-established body of rules for making cars, for making pharmaceuticals, for making all kinds of things. And we have our own system in place, harmonizing that and maybe even piggybacking on some of the efforts in the EU so we don't have duplication here in Canada. I could see really as a worthwhile way of reducing our cost and our red tape and making trades easier in the long term.
Now, one of the things that was included in the agreement is forums in which policymakers can discuss things like de-risking supply chains, coordinating security, and so on. And this is especially interesting given the American context, where the Trump administration is destroying many of these institutions that sort of support the federal government. Whereas here, what we're doing is building new ones and deepening existing institutions so that our countries can talk about things and resolve issues and so on.
That's right. Conflict resolution and dispute resolution are really key elements of multilateral arrangements, such as the World Trade Organization, as well as the individual trade agreements that we have. The US-Canada-Mexico agreement originally called for consultations to resolve the dispute. We had several issues that have been brought before tribunals and that actually have been settled. Not always in everyone's favor, because often one side gains more than the other. But it's a mechanism. We need strong mechanisms to resolve these disputes because they will arise naturally in any relationship, and we need these mechanisms to work effectively. Now, the Trump administration, one and two, have both been undermining those global institutions, and in particular the World Trade Organization. So we do need to rebuild some of this essentially aside from the US. If the US doesn't want to play ball, we need to find the coalition of those countries, in particular the European Union, that are willing to adhere to these terms of multilateral agreements that are supporting these global institutions. And that means we need this cooperation, and that will also draw in other countries. So to what extent it can then also involve our partners in Asia, to some extent also China, where there are significant tensions as well. That remains a question, but certainly for Canada, we need that cooperation with the European Union to build that coalition that supports these important institutions.
Yeah, that was another part of the agreement that sounded in a way like, the throwaway lines that you see in every kind of agreement like this or in the preamble. But within the context that you're discussing it becomes quite a bit more important. I'm talking about reaffirming the shared foundations of democracy, human rights, rule of law, open markets, making geopolitical pacts, as it were. It agreeing that we now believe, or that the two EU and Canada share common values, share common outlooks, share common respect for rule of law. In the current context, that's actually not a small thing.
It is very important that those countries, the EU, the UK, Canada, Australia, and others, actually come together and really push back against the chaos that's coming out of the United States. The move away from in the United States from the rule of law principles, the rule of international engagement and diplomacy. We need to find back a coalition of countries that can hold high the standards and values that we espouse, namely those of democracy, the rule of law, all of that helps resolve international conflicts. The world is always going to be full of conflicts and disputes, and we need these mechanisms that resolve them. And not through basically through strength and might, as the Trump administration does, but through negotiations and some horse trading when necessary to make sure all sides come out as feeling comfortable with a result that can live on forward. And we're now moving backwards. There's a risk of a deglobalization, of moving away from these principles that will hurt everybody because the gains from trade are very substantial. And if we're now going back to a situation where every country is out looking for themselves and not for also a global good, we're all losing in the end because everything is going to get more expensive.
That's a very good way for us to end this interview, Werner. And for viewers, this was part one of a three-part series. So we'll also be doing another interview with Werner about energy, labor mobility, climate, environment, and biodiversity. That's coming up shortly. So keep an eye out for it.
Thank you, Marco.